is the original author of the national stalking criminal legislation some years ago. I yield him 5 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you very much. As my colleague, Judge Poe, representative from Texas, has told you, some of the examples about women who have found themselves in this dire situation. We had in my county, in Orange County, California, a total of 4 young women in 1990 who were, in the span of 6 weeks, all confronted by the same situation. They were being stalked by an acquaintance or a former beau, someone they knew. Each knew they were going to be attacked. Each had been threatened that they would be attacked. And I spoke after the attack with a law enforcement officer there who said it was the hardest thing he ever had to do in his life, was to tell one of these young women, I know you feel he's going to attack you, but there's nothing we can do until you're physically attacked. Despite the threats he's made, there's nothing that we can do. So he said, I took it upon myself to follow this individual because I knew he intended to carry out that attack. And he said, I came within 2 minutes of preventing him from killing her. But unfortunately, he took her life, and then when he saw me, he took his own. This was the example given in this one case, but there were 4 cases within that 6 weeks in 1990. And I had previously passed legislation in the state Senate on terrorism as it related to credible threats made against synagogues and churches by those who threatened to blow up synagogues. And I thought, well, perhaps we can extend this and actually give law enforcement the chance to step in. Since that other law had been upheld by the state Supreme Court, perhaps they would uphold a law if we passed an anti-stalker law that said if you threatened the victim with a credible threat of great bodily harm, it became a stalking crime. And thereby, perhaps you would have the deterrent effect of having law enforcement able to go to these victims or go, more importantly, to perpetrators and tell them, you may not understand this, but under this new law, you face 3 years or more in state prison if you do this. And we passed the legislation in California after some debate. We had particularly effective testimony from one young woman who had been stalked by a high school acquaintance who she didn't even know for years, and finally taken at knife point, and there was a 12-hour standoff. But because he didn't drag her more than the allotted number of feet, it was not a kidnapping. So finally, with her testimony, we got that through the State House. And then we found that the very advice we were giving these victims, get away from your stalker, move because there's little we can do, meant that when they moved from one state of California to another state, let's say Florida, an example that I'm familiar with, the restraining order was no longer in effect, which meant that he couldn't be charged with stalking. So the answer to that was a federal law. By that time, we had used the California law as a template. We had passed it in all 50 states. Japan had adopted the law. Parliaments in Europe had adopted the law. But the question was, how do you protect those who go from state to state when those restraining orders are no longer in effect? So in the United States House of Representatives, I introduced that legislation. And as a result, this new law provides a uniform federal law protecting stalking victims when they cross state lines, either to travel or work or get away from their stalkers or for any other purpose. And when they're on federal property, if they're on a military base, for example, if they're at a post office. It was signed into law in 1996, and I will tell you now why I'm appreciative of these members bringing this law up today, of which I am a co-sponsor. Our key problem is getting people aware of the existence of this law. Our key challenge today is deterrence. As mentioned, you have a case today where 1 out of every 4 young women who's killed is being murdered by someone who formerly stalked them. And there is a deterrent effect to law enforcement coming to you and saying, you could be serving 3 years in federal penitentiary or in jail. You've got 3.4 million, actually, 3.4 million people being stalked, according to the Department of Justice, every year. If we had those in law enforcement, if judges were more cognizant of the challenges of this problem, we'd be better able to handle this situation. Many communities have come to understand that stalking is a serious problem. Many have come up with programs that can support victims and combat this crime, but we really need law enforcement to have a more focus, because how many times can you look at a situation and say, all right, there's something we could have done to help deter this? We know the incidences where that's been effective here. Most stalkers are known by their victims. It isn't always the case, but most are known.
I yield to the gentleman another additional minute.
I thank the gentleman from yielding. And in today's world, stalkers, unfortunately, are using a very new and upgraded type of technology from what traditionally they used. It used to be, you know, they'd leave a message on the phone. Today it's computers, it's GPS units, it's cell phones, it's social networking. And all of this can be used to harass victims. If anyone would like more information on National Stalking Awareness Month, I urge you, visit www.stalkingawarenessmonth.org and try, for those out there in law enforcement, try to understand just how devastating this can be to victims, and try to give them a hand and try to deter these attacks before they occur. Thank you again, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Georgia.